name is Wright. I'm a retired U.S. Army colonel and a former U.S. diplomat who resigned in 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq. And I'm out here because I think these killer drones that the Obama administration is using in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan are wrong. As a military person, I think these are actually not saving American lives because we're killing so many innocent civilians in the tribal areas of Pakistan. I think there are Afghan soldiers who live in those areas that go across the border into Pakistan, Afghanistan. It's a very fluid border. The families are all intermingled, and last year we had more U.S. soldiers killed by Afghan soldiers on what they call green on blue than we had killed by Taliban. And I would suggest that's because those Afghan soldiers have family members that have been killed by these drones, and they're taking it out on the soldiers back in those compounds.
Now, being a former colonel, what have you witnessed firsthand? Have you witnessed any of the atrocities that have gone on overseas? Are you even allowed to speak about that?
Well, I retired actually from the military in 1996. I'm old. But I've been involved in various conflicts, and yes, there are always atrocities that happen in war. What the U.S. forces have done in Iraq and Afghanistan, we know of specific massacres that our soldiers have conducted. And then you look at what these drones are doing in terms of what the illegality of a president of the United States now becoming the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the executioner, which is not his role. And yet he's doing that with this weapon system. So I think that's an atrocity. It's a war crime, actually, I think, what the Obama administration is doing with these drones.
Now, what made you become an actual peace activist?
Well, after I resigned in 2003 and gave up my career in the federal government in opposition to the war in Iraq, the next step was to speak out publicly about why I had resigned. And once you start speaking out publicly, a lot of the peace groups will come to you and ask you to speak to their groups and do interviews and things like that. And when I was in the government, it wasn't that I believed every single thing that every one of the 8 presidents that I served under said. I mean, there were a lot of controversial policies that I didn't agree with, but I didn't resign over them. But it was this Iraq war that I just could not take. So I resigned, and I've been welcomed by the peace community as a person that, having been in the military and the Foreign Service, is willing to speak out about it.
So when you were in the military, and you did, there's some things you said you didn't agree with, but you still went along with. How were you able to do that?
Well, I mean, it's an excellent question. In the United States, we don't have a tradition of resignation. We don't teach people, to act on your conscience. And so for me, I stayed in the government during periods of time that I knew that some of these policies that were the premier policies of the U.S. government were wrong. But I always found ways that I could find programs that I could work on that I didn't feel were hurting people. And I think that's the way a lot of people who are in the government, that's how they stay in. They don't work on the programs they disagree with. And if you look at it now, we've had some people in our military who are war resistors and who are conscientious objectors, but overall it's a tiny percentage. Most people will, if they make the decision to work for the government, they kind of hang in there and they hold their nose to a lot of policies that they don't agree with. So it took me a long time to finally resign, so I don't say everybody ought to resign right now, you ought to do that. It's whenever in a person's heart or soul or conscience that they determine that they can't do this any longer, then they need to get out for their own peace of mind. And I'm so glad I resigned. I can't imagine staying in the government, in the Bush administration or in the Obama administration.
Now, knowing what you know now, if you could go back, being into the service, take it back to when you're active, Do you think you could have done more being in the military to fight against this beast? Or do you think you can do a lot more out of the military by being a peace activist?
Well, I think that it is important to have people within the system that are trying to change the system. And in fact, that's the way I kind of worked my careers. I was a pain in the side of the military on a lot of things, because I would, within the system, I would argue with them about things that had happened, policies that they were working on. But I never resigned when I lost the battle, so to speak, on the policy issues. So, but it is important that we have people that stay in the system to challenge it from the inside. I challenged it in the State Department too. I sent letters of dissent from positions that I had directly to the office of the Secretary of State to let them know of my concerns about policies on Iraq, on North Korea, on Israel, Palestine. And I got back very paltry responses. It was like you could tell they weren't listening, they didn't care what I had to say, and at a certain point you kind of go, well, if nobody's going to listen, then to speak out, you have to get out of the system. They won't let you oppose it publicly by staying in. So that's why I resigned, really.
Do you have any words of advice for people who want to get involved in the grassroots level, you know, based on your experience, you know, what they could do to help them get started and kind of lose that fear, to actually get up off the couch, shut off the television, and hit the streets?
Yeah, and that's good. We need more people on the streets. Well, finding friends that kind of believe the same way you do, that you can have a little support network, and it may be peace action groups that are in your town or your university, or create one so that there can be a nucleus of people who have the same beliefs, the same concerns about social justice issues, about war and peace, and so that you can mobilize together, because it's a lot easier when you're out on the streets and you know 3 or 4 people or 5 or 6 or hundreds of them now that I know now, because I've been a part of this for 10 years. So it's important to have friends around you, and then that gives you the courage to reach out to people who may not agree with you, and to have the conversations about why it's important that somebody, well, you try to get someone to listen to you about what you believe are the important issues of the day.
They are putting the infrastructure in place, legally and structurally, with DHS and NORTHCOM, domestic deployment of U.S. troops, FEMA, all the infrastructure's in place, and of course the legal infrastructure, with all these court decisions, NSA spying on Americans. It's the infrastructure for a police state. And so all that's left now is a trigger event. And so I said, well, you know, one way to throw a monkey wrench in there and buy more time for liberty movement is to reach out to the guys in the ranks who have the guns.
I was the CIA asset covering Iraq and Libya at the United Nations from 1995 until the Iraq War in 2003. And I worked in anti-terrorism as a specialty, and we developed a peace option for Iraq that would have made the whole conflict avoidable.